that the sun shines down its power to all the world and makes the wind blow strong as it will. So lovely earth can stay lovely still. Hello, ladies and gentlemen. This is Energy Week with George Harvey and the famous Sean Auth, who I met just the other day. Tom is not in because he had a fall and didn't really get badly bashed, but he did get bruises on his back, and so it's kind of painful for him. Anyway, Sean has offered to stand in for him or sit in for him. What I do every day, get up early, look at the news for the day. I make a synopsis about 50 to 55 words long of each piece I find interesting. Put a link on it, collect 10 or 15 such in my blog, goharvey.wordpress.com. And usually Tom and I, but today Sean and I, go over the 20 or so that we find the most interesting for the week. So here we're starting on, what are we starting on? Sean, what are we starting on? Here we go, March 10th. You didn't have to answer. Okay. And we're starting with an article on children in Oregon. So we're going to have to get a picture up on this, Sean. You might as well just go right. There you go. There you go. Now put it up. This is our starting picture. Here is a picture of children protesting in Oregon. Children. 21 teenagers appeared in an Oregon courtroom to challenge the federal government over what they claim is a failure to protect them from the impacts of climate change, while several hundred school children protested outside. The case is just one of a large group of similar cases. This is from The Guardian. Got any comments on that you'd like to share with us, Sean?
I'd be interested to know who contributed this column or what organization.
This was The Guardian. It's a newspaper. It's published primarily in the UK and Australia.
I'm familiar with George Monbiot, who writes for it.
Oh, really? Okay.
But
okay.
Yeah. Anyway,
our next item, and there's no picture for this. A proposed New York State subsidy for nuclear power will come too late for the James A. Fitzpatrick plant near Oswego. An energy vice president told the State Public Service Commission that the subsidy will not affect company plans to shutter the plant by January 2017. This is from the Albany Times-Union. Got anything on that?
I am actually not up to date on the latest at this plant.
But you're up to date on nuclear? A little bit. Okay. What do you think about the fact that the plant is being shut down? Tom Fennell has commented on this plant a number of times, saying the reason why the governor, Cuomo, wants to keep it open is because there is a lack of transmission infrastructure in the area. So if it goes down, there is likely to be some shortage of power in the area of Oswego and a large chunk of New York State around that. This is happening at the same time that Governor Cuomo is trying to shut down Indian Point, which is a plant with 2 reactors that is newer and is, I believe, still making a profit. James A. the Fitzpatrick plant is unprofitable. Energy is losing money on it. I don't know how much, but my guess is that it's probably several $100,000 a day. So we have this interesting kind of juxtaposition of Governor Cuomo wanting to close one plant and keep another open. Now, his reason for wanting to close the Indian Point plant is that it's not sufficiently far from New York. You might remember that when Fukushima Daiichi melted down, Americans in Japan were told by the U.S. State Department, I believe, to stay at least 50 miles away from it. And it happens that if you look at the map and find what is 50 miles from the Indian Point plant, there are a couple of blocks of New York City on the southern end of Staten Island that are 50 miles or more away. But New York City, Newark, cities in Connecticut, other cities in New York State, it would involve getting many people out of the area to do an evacuation of that area. Okay, our next item coming up is from Sea News Renewables. We have a sunset in the Sahara picture for that. There you go.
It's coming up.
It's coming up. Very good.
Here we go.
Thank you so much. A consortium comprising Italy's Enel Green Power SPA, Morocco-based Nariva Holding, and Germany's Siemens Wind Power have won a preferred bidder status on an 850 megawatt wind power tender in Morocco. There are 5 wind parks involved, ranging from 100 to 300 megawatts. As I think I said, this is from Sea News Renewables. And that's just a picture of the Sahara that you see in front of you. But Morocco has really quite a remarkable amount of wind power and solar power both being installed. The country had been 98% supplied by fossil fuels, and it's already got huge solar plants, and now we're seeing 850 megawatts of wind power going in. This is quite a change for Morocco.
I'm looking at this one right now. I've actually been to Morocco, and I spent about a week in Tétouan. I could see a wind power plant that was going in there. But
Really?
it's very interesting too, because you look right across the Strait of Gibraltar and you've got a couple Spanish industries, and Endesa is one of them, and they're big into solar and windmill. The Andasol plant, before the Ivanpath installation in California went in, I believe, was the biggest concentrated solar panel.
It could be.
It's concentrated solar power installation in the world. So it's a good place.
Yeah.
I believe it's a good area to be looking at things like concentrated solar power, and then even some other interesting things, like if you've got areas where the Mediterranean climate gives you sort of these wet winds, you can do stuff like you saw in Tatooine, let's say, in the first Star Wars, where they had these moisture generator things. There are people who are actually looking into using different techniques to pull some of that water out of the air and fight desertification.
Right. Our next picture, which is coming up, actually looks like something out of a Star Wars movie, I think. This is a Vattenfall or Vattenfall image. I'm not sure how to pronounce it. I believe it's a Swedish name. After a run-in with Donald Drumpf, which they spell D-R-U-M-P-F, the European Offshore Wind Development Center has seen the beginning of offshore works start this month. The European Offshore Wind Development Center is being developed by a partnership of Vattenfall and Aberdeen Renewable Energy Group. This is from Clean Technica. That's an interesting picture of construction of a wind farm with the foundations for the wind turbines lined up in a row, as I said, looking to me like something out of a Star Wars movie. And that thing with the crane next to it, with a boat in the distance below it to the right, is actually a ship, which is on stilts that come up through the hull and go up in the air, so that it can be lowered down so that it can just move to the next wind turbine. And it has wind turbine components. You can see the blades for one turbine on there. It looks like there's another wind turbine at least on there for the next structure to be built after. And that, by the way, is absolutely huge. I have no idea how tall it is, but my guess is that it might be 600-700 feet tall. Next, also from Clean Technica, and this is still on March 11th. According to a new study published by researchers from the University of Queensland and Griffith University in Australia, global warming could occur much more quickly than previously thought. The model forecasts an increase in the global average temperature by 1.5 degrees as early as the year 2020. Not good news. The COP21 conference last December, what they agreed to was to cap it at 2 degrees. We've already gone 1. And there were a number of people there who were saying we should cap it at 1.5 degrees. But the possibility of doing that looks pretty like it might be remote according to this, or non-existent possibly according to this study. We've got a ways to go on that. All right. Coming up Saturday, March 12th, a National Post article tells us it takes 2 years to build them. Each operator trains for a month before picking up the controls, and they get fried by radiation after working just 10 hours. These robots, like the one you see there on the screen, are sent in to search for the core of the Fukushima Daiichi nuclear plant, and they have a very short life and a very specialized life span. I have no idea how big that thing is. You don't know, do you, Sean?
I can look that up at the moment.
Oh, okay. They look to me like they're not all that big.
260 millimeters long.
260 millimeters, so that's a little over 10 inches. That's not big. But they get fried by radiation, and they take 2 years to build. They must be building these things by hand. This is anyway, that's a robot which doesn't last very long in the circumstances that are there. Our next item comes from cnsnews.com. Oregon is the first state to eliminate coal from its power supply through legislation, and it now boasts some of the most stringent demands for renewable energy among state peers. The law phases coal generation out by 2030 and requires utilities to provide half of their power through renewables by 2040. This is an interesting law for a number of reasons, but one of them is that it was actually pushed by the utilities in Oregon. Oregon is the first state to ban coal, but within 2 days of the time that it did, Washington State followed it.
That's interesting. I would also make a comment that might have a lot to do, with the levelized cost of energy from natural gas right now as a result of fracking. If you look at it, you've got some of the largest coal companies in the United States on the point of declaring bankruptcy.
They're already bankrupt. As a matter of fact, Peabody said they were about to declare bankruptcy in the news yesterday. And Alpha Natural Resources, Arch Holdings, these companies are in desperate trouble. And one of the things Tom and I have talked about is that the Dow Jones Coal Index has lost 97% of its value in the last 8 years. And that is primarily because the coal companies are producing a product which, when it's burned, puts mercury into the atmosphere. The mercury travels in an atomic form in the atmosphere, very light particles, very heavy atoms compared to other atoms, but they're very light particles. But they get caught in raindrops, and they come down hundreds of miles in some cases from where they were put into the atmosphere. And the result of that is that if you want to fish in waters in Vermont and eat the fish, it's a good idea to find out how many fish you can eat of that species in that waterway. And we've got waterways where you shouldn't eat any of anything. There are species like trout, for example. Trout is a good example. When it's a very small fish, it's eating very small planktonic food a lot of the time. but as it gets bigger, it eats things that are higher and higher in the food chain, and ultimately it will be a mercury collector. So if trout is too big, you don't want to eat it. It's a sad situation, but it's because of the use of coal.
Do you know? Oh, if I might ask, do you know what the relative half-life of, something like methylmercury is in the waterway? That is, let's say we stop burning coal right now, and we're just using natural gas, so we don't have to worry about these mercury emissions. How long would it be until a fisherman could say, move from 1 fish per week to 2 fish per week, roughly?
I don't know, but it's a very long time, I would guess. Do you happen to know?
I don't. All I know is that the latest is on the watershed. They noticed their first salmon coming up the Connecticut River for, I don't know, maybe a couple decades. But
really?
Yeah.
Really. I remember hearing that sturgeon, which had been extirpated in the Hudson River and is not a fish that goes out to sea much, had reappeared in the Hudson River some years after the Clean Water Act went in. And obviously, in order for that to have happened, there had to have been sturgeon hiding around somewhere, So it's interesting. I didn't know that the salmon were coming up the Connecticut River, but I'm not terribly surprised. I wonder how long that's been going on.
It's very recent. It was in the latest Connecticut River Watershed Council mailing.
Really?
Yes.
Is this just something that they decided to do on their own, or is it something that is the result of stocking or something like that?
It's not the result of stocking. I can see. Okay, there's a news article for. I actually don't see the headline here, but
okay.
Yes.
Well, our next item, which is on Saturday, March 12th, is about fracking. It comes from Clean Technica. After 6 years, Sean, would you put, you've got it up, I'm sorry. After 6 years and many reams of legal papers, 2 couples won a rare $424 million jury verdict against a fracking company, Cabot Oil and Gas Corp. The jury found that the company contaminated their water wells with methane, leaching underground from natural gas fracking sites. This is from Clean Technica, and that looks like so much of Pennsylvania. I don't know what it is about Pennsylvania that makes it look different from Vermont. This could be in Vermont, could be in New Hampshire, but it's in western Pennsylvania, not very far from Lake Erie. The ground out there is flatter than here, but of course there's always a bit of flat land around Vermont to mask the countrysides. Our next item, Vermont Senate Committee on Natural Resources and Energy approved a bill aimed at reforming Vermont's energy siting process. State Senator John Rogers and the Public Access Board still makes the final call, despite increased local participation. This is from watchdog.org. Could you And what that means is that local municipalities and so forth, the people are going to have more input into the siting process. But the siting process here is going to go ultimately to it will still go to the Public Service Board for approval. So the state is still going to be the organization that does the approval, but it is people have been pushing this for quite a while, and my take on it, one thing is that if the communities are going to have increased participation, they should consider renewable power and power reliability, sustainable power, resilience, and so forth, while they're doing this. And that should be part of the issue, because the siting of a wind farm or a solar plant, the local siting could have an effect on that. And our next item, that, by the way, came from watchdog.org. Our next item is from March 31st, and I need, this is from Clean Technica. I need to explain this. This is a video from Climate Central, which got its material from NOAA and NSIDC.org. And what you're looking at here is a picture from space of the Arctic Sea, the Arctic Ocean rather. And on the left there you see Alaska and Russia. If you put an arrow pointing right on the left side of the screen, it would be pointing north. If you put an arrow at the bottom central, that pointing up, it would be north, but if it were at the top central pointing down, it would be north. And if it were all the way to the right pointing left, it would be pointing north. We're looking right at the North Pole here. But between Russia and Alaska, you'll notice that there is an area that is dark gray blue. And to the left of that on the screen is an area that's just gray. Just gray means water. Dark gray blue here is a color that has been assigned to this. This is an enhanced color thing. The dark bluish gray is fresh ice that's floating on top of the water. And as the ice is older, it is lighter in color. So the white ice in this case is 9 years old or more. So I'm going to start this up. It's 1990, it's starting, and you're going to see what happens to ocean ice. I'm going to stop this, I believe, a couple of times in the course of this for comment, but here we go. This is ice. You see the ice going 94, 95, 96, 97. Now, this is the year 2001. I meant to stop it at 2000. 1998 was a record year for heat. And so we're continuing from 1998 and watching a period which our Republican presidential candidates in many cases have said since 1998 there's been really no change in the climate. There's been a hiatus, they claim, in global warming. And I want to show you what has happened during that hiatus. This is 2001, 2, 3, 4, 5. 2005 was another record year for heat. 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. 2010 was a record year for heat. 11, 12, 13, 14. 2014 was a record year for heat. 1998 beat a record that was set in 1997. 2005 beat the record in 1998. 2010 beat the record of 2005. 2014 beat the record for 2010. And here we're up to the present time. And that original white mass of 9-year-old ice that you saw there is almost all gone. The ice has been melting, and there is a possibility that at some point in maybe even this year, they were talking about it happening last year, it would be possible to sail a ship right to the North Pole. This is the result of climate change, and it is a climate change that for political purposes people are claiming doesn't happen. And the political purposes are very simple. They're based on the fact that the fossil fuels industry is the biggest industry in the world, and it's in serious trouble. It is an industry that is being replaced by solar and wind that are distributed. Solar power goes up on people's rooftops. A guy can own, or a gal can own, their own guy or gal. Do people object to that sort of? Women object to gals sometimes. I don't know. Anyway, a man or a woman can have a solar power plant on their own rooftop and be their own power generator, and that does not sound like centralized power to me, but the people who are objecting to this, who are putting money into political campaigns and have actually announced that they're going to try to take over the government of the United States in the next election, House, Senate, and White House, and put almost $900 million up for that, say it isn't happening. Well, they make money on fossil fuels. They want to keep making money on fossil fuels. And they don't mind the fact that according to the WHO, it costs Americans $250 billion a year in health costs. So anyway, enough of that. We'll go back to our next. We have to get a new picture on there, Sean. There you go. All right, I'm going to have to get a new picture. There. We don't need that on the screen just yet.
Okay. So we'll push it
Actually,
back to you.
we do. That's our next picture, and it's for this story. This story comes from Clean Technica. This winter's year's winter has been. Oh, that was the video that we just saw. I'll read this. You can leave that up. It doesn't matter.
No, too late.
It's okay. This year's winter has been quite strange, with temperatures throughout much of the northern hemisphere being considerably higher than at any other time in high accuracy records of over 100 years. Now, that video was showing how fast the Arctic ice is declining. That was from Clean Technica. Now we can go to that next picture. And this is also from Clean Technica. A new report from energy consultancy firm Barinja projects that the Scottish Isles could see economic benefits of around £725 million, which is about $1 billion, over the next quarter century from renewable energy development. The benefits include revenues of up to £390 million for community-owned projects. And that is another picture that looks like it comes out of some Star Wars movie. I don't know, but I believe that what we're seeing was forested 500 years ago. And those forests were cut down because of the invention of the chimney, which meant that people could have fires in their bedrooms. And prior to that, they had the Great Hall, in which the fire was in one big room with a very high ceiling, and it was vented out a window at the top of the room or through what they called a louver, which was directly above the fire, and everybody would sleep in that one rather not very cozy room. The Great Hall was replaced by a Great Hall that had a fireplace, but also a very much lower ceiling. Our next, that item, as I said, was from Clean Technica. Now, Monday, March 14th, last week, this is from The Guardian, last week being the week before Monday, March 14th, a bipartisan group of 21 Florida mayors wrote to debate moderators to argue it would be, quote, unconscionable for these issues of grave concern for the people of Florida, which are climate change and sea level rise, not to be addressed, end quote. Candidates were asked to respond, and they did. And I want to point out, I actually did some research on this picture. Could we have the picture, Sean?
Yes.
The picture here is of a flooded Florida community. The amount of sea level rise we've had in the last 15 years would account for 3.5 inches of the water that you see there. And I don't know, that's pretty flat land down there. And the water in the middle of the street there, I would bet, is not much more than 3.5 inches deep. It might be 5 inches deep. But if you removed 3.5 inches from that flooding would look a good deal less impressive than it does in this picture. And of course, what happened was they hemmed and they hawed, and they, if they were Republicans, they hemmed and they hawed, and they basically kind of avoided the issue. Hillary Clinton, who, by the way, I dislike rather profoundly, and Bernie Sanders, who I like as much as I dislike Hillary, basically both of them were right on it. They knew exactly what to say because they had been saying it all along. Climate change is a big problem. Bernie says that climate change is the biggest problem we've got in front of us. And in that respect, by the way, this very kind of left side democratic socialist happens to be in agreement with a number of other organizations, including, much to the point, the United States Defense Department, which goes to Congress year after year and says, climate change is our biggest problem, gang. And the Congress is made up of people who act like they're stunned by the words, or possibly like they didn't hear them I think more likely like they didn't hear them. So that's, and that particular story is from The Guardian. And our next story, by the way, is also about something from the Defense Department. You can put me on if you know, people don't usually object to my face all that much.
Okay.
At least not to my face, they object to my face, but you know. Our next item is about a military operation. And you can put that picture up anytime you want, but you know, I was just telling you, you can fool around with these pictures, you're allowed. And this is from Stripes, Japan, which is, may or may not be directly related to Stars and Stripes, but it's certainly taking this story from Stars and Stripes. 16 United States ships that participated in relief efforts after Japan's nuclear disaster 5 years ago remain contaminated with low levels of radiation from the crippled Fukushima Daiichi nuclear power plant, according to top Navy officials. And this was information they gave to Stars and Stripes. A total of 25 ships took part in Operation Tomodachi, and those 25 ships include the 16 that have been contaminated. So they haven't managed to clean these ships up. They were delivering supplies to Fukushima. They were also doing other things, helping the Japanese, but they exposed their sailors to radiation, and a number of them have developed problems that they blame on radiation. Nuclear power, of course, is clean, safe, and reliable, as we all know. Clean? Is nuclear power clean?
Well,
2.2% of all nuclear power plants that have ever gone online delivering power to a grid for customers have melted down. 2.2%. 11 out of 500, roughly speaking. And I think that if you put up a nuclear plant and said, hey, listen people, there's only a 2.2% chance that this is going to melt down in the next 30 years, I don't think they will let you build a plant in their community. What do you think?
I have a slightly differing opinion.
Uh-huh.
I think that we should be able to make common cause with people who don't want to see things like mercury in their fish or...
We don't need to worry about it. Sean, believe me, we don't need to worry about it. We've got all the power we need from solar, wind, and other renewable power, and it's a whole lot cheaper than nuclear, and it goes in faster than nuclear, and it costs less to run than nuclear. Really, look at the LCOE, look at Lazard Associates. Their LCOE for nuclear and their LCOE for solar. And tell me if the solar isn't rapidly dropping to half the price of nuclear.
I won't contend that, but one thing I will say is that the other question you have to take into account, or the other aspect of this that you have to take into account, is the capacity factor, which is something that here in Vermont I think is an issue.
No, not an issue. Look at what happened in Germany, all right? In 2010, Germany had the most reliable grid in Europe. The average customer lost 15 minutes per year in power outages. Now, they have shut down half their nuclear power plants, 8 actually out of 15, and the 7 that remain actually generate a little bit more power than those 8 did, because the 8 were older and smaller. They've gone from about 8% renewable power to about 33%. And in the process of doing that, they have changed their reliability from the best in Europe at 15 minutes loss per year per customer to the best in Europe at 10 minutes loss per year per customer. They became more reliable. And the reason for this is complicated, but it has to do with virtual power plants, among other things.
Virtual power plants?
You don't know about virtual power plants. Oh, they're cool. A virtual power plant is a computer. And what it does is it ties together demand response based demand and power from renewable resources, which are distributed. Now, if you consider wind power, for example, you could get wind power in central Germany across the grid from the North Sea. Or you could get it from the Baltic. Or you could get it land-based. And land-based, it could come up from single turbines that were put in by community co-ops or something like that. And you can say to any one of those, okay, I know you got wind, but it's time to shut off because we've got too much power on the grid. You can take the power that's coming from solar, you can take the power that's coming from natural gas, if you've got it, but you can take the power that comes from biodigesters. You can take the power from other biomass-based power. You can get geothermal power if it happens to be around. There's not much of it used in Europe, but certainly there's hydropower, and you can adjust the demand while you're adjusting the load. And the result is more reliable in terms of the capacity factor than, and not in terms of the capacity factor, in terms of reliability. It's more reliable than nuclear.
I won't contend you with that, but what I will say in response is that if you look at the carbon emissions from Germany since enacting these measures post-Fukushima, their share of brown coal use has gone up. Their emissions of sulfur dioxide and carbon have also gone up concomitantly.
No question.
And the other thing you have to look at as well is the grid cost of energy, because there they have some of the highest grid prices of electricity in Europe, which is hurting.
No. When they switched to renewables, their wholesale prices dropped. Their grid price to the customers went up, but that was because of a change in taxation. Now, their use of brown coal, they could not shut down the brown coal plants because they were contractually obliged to sell the electricity from those plants to customers elsewhere. So this is a complicated issue. It really is a complicated issue.
That much is for sure.
And they have been reducing in the last year the amount of coal they're using. Anyway, I think we should possibly, this is an interesting discussion, we should continue it at length. And I'll badger you through the whole thing, sorry to say. Okay, our next item is also from Monday, March 14th. It's in Clean Technica. U.S. wind and solar electric generation grew by 20,659 megawatt hours in 2015 compared to the full year 2014. That's compared to fossil fuel electric generating dropping by 18,041 megawatt hours. Unfortunately, in part due to a terrible drought, hydroelectricity generation dropped by 8,199 megawatt hours. Now, a lot of that is the drought in the West, and that's a serious problem. You know, Carly, what's her name? Carly Fiorina, the woman who was running for president, said that the drought in California was caused by environmentalists who had blocked the construction of dams, but I happen to disagree with her.
Ultimately, no. It's a problem of whether you have any water that you can run in the dam.
Yeah, that's
and then
right.
You get the same capacity factor.
Yeah.
If you don't have enough.
That item came from Clean Technica. Our next item is from Tuesday, March 15th. And we have a picture here of contaminated soil and contamination on plants being collected and put into plastic bags. This is from the BBC. Workers from Peru's state-controlled petrol company have been mopping up and scooping oil from a pipeline spill last month as it stuck in ravines and on vegetation in smaller rivers. It is the second major spill this year in the northern part of Peru's jungle region. And the second major spill, this is a pipeline problem, and it's a problem. I'm going to go on from there to the next one. This is really kind of stunning. Sorry, this is really kind of stunning. Okay, I didn't have this in my notes, but it's there. Uruguay went from having virtually no wind generation in 2007 to become a double world record holder in less than a decade. By 2019, it was receiving the largest share of clean energy investment as a percentage of the gross domestic product. And in 2014, installed the most wind per capita of any country. This is clean technique. I've never seen a graph like this before. You hear about a hockey stick graph. This kind of puts any hockey stick graph I've ever seen to shame. What do you think?
I would say that this might have a lot to do with the ex-president Jose Mujica, who's definitely had a very, I would say, leftist point of view.
Leftists are good.
Quite so. If you go on YouTube, you can see some of the addresses he has given to the, I believe it is the South American Conference.
Yeah, leftists, I will say, I don't think are always right, but nevertheless, this is really kind of stunning. I mean, in 2008, from this graph, it looks like they had less than 1% of the of their electricity from wind. And in 2013, it was still only about 2.5%, and it jumped in 1 year to 19% from 2.5%. And that is because of the installation of wind turbines. And this is something that happens. One of my beefs with nuclear power is that it takes forever to get it in. And I will recognize that a lot of that is because of opposition. And a lot of the opposition is not intelligently driven. But I happen to be opposed to it, and Sean obviously is not. I'm going to grant you that Sean is not being stupid here. He's just disagreeing with me because I'm very disagreeable, and it's easy to disagree with me. But
I do so against my better judgment, perhaps.
Aha.
But the other thing I will say is that I'm seeing that some of these installations aren't that big. I see an article from the 28th of February 2015 that says that they have roughly 65.1 megawatts in the country of generating capacity.
Right. Well, Uruguay is not a huge country.
It's very small.
And you know, I'm always surprised when I see articles about hydro dams in Uruguay because it's not very mountainous, but it has a certain amount of hydro. But to move from 2.5% of your electricity to 19% of your electricity in 1 year means that a lot of wind power was installed. And Uruguay is one of a number of countries, Morocco being another, which is moving very, very aggressively in the direction of renewable power. Nicaragua is another, and they have moved, despite the fact that I don't think they really needed to all that much because they were getting a huge amount of their power from hydro, but they moved aggressively on solar and wind. Chile is another one that has moved very aggressively on any kind of renewable power that it could put in. And since they have large areas of very dry desert, which also happen to be very windy, they've been putting in concentrating solar and so forth and having a lot go in. So it's not a surprise to me that the people in Uruguay would at least think about this. But clearly, this is an impressive move. Who was the president who retired?
Jose Mujica and I think Dilma Rousseff.
And what became of him?
I'm not quite sure, actually. Oh, wait, no, Dilma Rousseff is the president of Brazil.
Oh, okay.
Pardon me. Anyway, I am not quite sure what he's up to these days, but...
And he was replaced by someone in his own party, or...?
That actually is not something I'm familiar with.
That's okay.
Here we go. I see it's Tabaré Vázquez, who is an Uruguayan president. He stepped up to the presidency in 2015, and he was the previous president from the period from 2005 to 2010.
Oh, okay.
He's a physician by training.
Ah.
And yes.
Okay. Our next item is from Energy Matters. And I'll just read this. The Tasmanian energy crisis drags on. water levels in the hydro reservoirs are at a record low 14.8%. The fault is in the Basslink interconnector between Tasmania and Victoria, and that is a break that has happened, and they don't know where it is in the cable, which runs on the ocean floor over a distance of 230 miles. It is not enough wind. There is not enough wind power to maintain the power supply, and they have to use diesel, which is their backup power. This is a serious problem. They were getting 40% of their power from the mainland, and this is a big island. I mentally, I'm going to say I think it might be as big as New England, but it might be smaller than that. I don't know. It's not terribly heavily populated, but there are a lot of people who live there, and they just have serious problems because they've got they had the majority of their power was coming from two sources, both of which have turned out to be unreliable.
Which two were those? The
Basslink interconnector was 40% of their power. I'm not sure how much of their power they were getting from their hydro reservoirs, but it was substantial. And they only have, their reservoirs are down 85%.
And this is another issue that I have with this is, again, you're limiting yourself in terms of the level to which you can consume energy or engage in activities like, let's just say, use the lights, use the refrigerator.
Yes.
Especially if you're talking about smaller areas of land. I'm looking here, I see that Tasmania has a land extent of 26,000 square miles.
Which is as I would recall the figure, about 4.5 times the size of the state of Vermont.
That would make sense. They've got 500,000 people.
They've got 500,000, which is about the same, a little bit less than the population of Vermont. Mm-hmm. So this is an area. It would be, in the northern hemisphere, we're seeing solar power going up in Scotland. We're seeing solar power going up, not as much, but going up in Alaska. And Tasmania is pretty far south, but I don't think it's not in an environment where solar would be excluded. It has excellent wind resources, but the government has been, like the government of Australia in general, reluctant to give any support to wind power being put in. And honestly, my opinion is that a lot of this is the result of opposition based on the idea that they want big businesses to own power. They see a power paradigm which involves big centralized power. Now, Sean, we don't have very much time, so we're going to have to go through the rest of these pretty quickly. From the Energy Collective, also on Tuesday, March 15th, total energy sales in 2015 fell 1.1% from the previous year. This is in the United States, marking the 5th year in the last 8 years that electricity sales have fallen. The flattening electricity sales reflect declining sales to industry and little or no growth in sales to residential and commercial sectors, despite the fact that these sectors are growing. So what we're seeing here is the gross national product is going up, and electricity sales are going down, and so are fossil fuel sales. The bottom has fallen out of the coal market for all practical purposes, but this is an interesting situation where anybody who's selling power, especially fossil fuels and nuclear, are running into trouble because the market is in decline in terms of its size. The market is shrinking. Their market share is shrinking. And they have got legal and scientific opposition. I'm speaking primarily of opposition from places like the United Nations and its drive for clean air. They've got medical opposition. The United States is spending $250 billion a year on medical expenses relating to air pollution. People are dying at a rate of, people are dying from air pollution caused by fossil fuels at a rate of about 1 every 8.5 seconds. This is worldwide. This is a problem.
It's a good reason to live in Vermont. If you live in a city, the air quality is much worse. It drops off about 5 years from your life expectancy.
But in Vermont, it's still not as good as it should be.
Right.
Okay, our next item is another picture from Star Wars movie. This is actually, huh?
It's our theme.
It's our theme, which you started off, by the way. It's your fault. This is a picture of a wind farm in Alaska, and I didn't actually find it, but I believe that wind farm is on Kodiak Island. Anyway, this is from Triple Pundit. Opinion rather. How Google became the world's largest corporate purchaser of renewable power is the name of the article. The Google approach to renewable energy is not unlike how many utilities purchase power. It often enters into power purchase agreements, and its projects range from California to Sweden. And that is what they're doing is these power purchase agreements. You can get power from power purchase agreements that's almost unbelievably inexpensive compared to what it is on regular grid power. And I have seen wind power PPAs, they're called, appear in the news at 1.5 cents per kilowatt hour, if you can imagine that.
That's incredible.
Well, you got to remember, the federal government is putting 2.7 cents, 2.3 cents into this. So the 1.5 cents becomes 3.8 cents. But even at 3.8 cents, it's crazy.
Yeah.
You know, how do you compete with that? Well, you can compete with it because it's not 24/7. But when you have 3 or 4 such contracts, you usually wind up having very cheap power that's coming in so cheap that if you have to throw some of it away, you can.
And that is part of the problem that is undercutting the baseload generating capacity of things like nuclear and also
natural gas.
Natural gas, not so much. In fact, part of
Really?
the reason why it's doing so well right now is A, because of the fracking, but B, because you need to have a sort of power plant that can ramp up its energy production in very short time scales to cover out what you can't actually do in response to, let's just say, what do they call it? Load response, I believe, where
Virtual power plant.
The virtual power plant. The virtual power plant, which you had mentioned earlier, is a perfect example of this. Because let's say here in Brattleboro, you have certain things that if we had a smart grid implemented, we could be cutting off right now or shuffling around. 10 people want to do their laundry. The dryer runs at 700 watts or something like that.
Yep.
Well, they can probably wait, and so maybe you can use this virtual power plant to schedule this to happen a little bit later. But there are certain things which are kind of do or die. You can't shut down the freezers or parts of the medical buildings. So when you're scraping the bottom of the barrel there, and you're not allowing any sort of resources to maintain the grid or to maintain the natural gas plants.
But grid response, you know, the German grid operator said that they believed that the grid could actually absorb solar and wind, just those two, to the point of having 70% of the total being from those sources before they even need a battery.
That might be true.
And the battery response is much faster than natural gas.
This is true, but then you have to look at the cost of installing and maintaining these systems as an added cost to the wind, as well as the capacity factor, which if it's only going to be working at the full capacity at 80% of the time, then you have to multiply that by 0.8, or actually divide that by 0.8.
Yeah.
But if it's only working 50% of the time, then you have to install twice as much capacity.
Yeah, but you know, if you think about it, baseload power plants have got similar problems.
They certainly do.
You know, this is a very complicated issue.
It is, but if you look at what's happening with our grids, biogas is definitely an important part of the grid, because if you see, we can use that as a source of methane and use that as natural gas instead of having to pump that out of the ground.
Absolutely.
And I don't know enough about the economics of it, but I'm fairly certain that it makes sense to install it anywhere we can,
Yeah.
and use that as a way to start recycling some of the things that we're just
Right.
otherwise dumping into the rivers. I don't
Yeah.
know what the case is here in Brattleboro regarding our
Well, we
wastewater
have
treatment plant.
biomass. We actually have biogas collection at the old landfill.
Perfect.
Our next item is from Clean Technica. Swedish energy firm Vattenfall. What?
I switched it.
Oh, it's okay. Announced this week that it had started development of the 3.6 gigawatt Norfolk Vanguard offshore wind farm. 3.6 gigawatts.
Wow.
Vanguard is 47 kilometers off the coast and will generate the equivalent electricity necessary to supply approximately 1.3 million UK households. This is from Clean Technica. And I should point out, Sean, you probably are unaware of this, but the capacity factors of offshore wind are now getting upwards of 50%. Okay, and our final item, this is really kind of important. It comes from Commonwealth Magazine. A group of 100 Massachusetts state representatives broke ranks with House leadership, urging that that reconciliation of the House and Senate bills on net metering hew more closely to the Senate approach. Nearly 2/3 of the House members signed the letter. Now, this is important. 150 people voted in favor of the House bill, but of that 150 people, 100 of them told the committee, reconciling it with the Senate bill, they wanted it to look like the Senate bill. And those two bills are radically different in most respects. The House bill said they wanted to have something like 5.8 cents per kilowatt hour for net metering, which is really low. You're going to lose money on that. If you buy solar and put it on your roof, you've got to have some reason other than getting a little bit of extra cash from net metering. That's just going to have to be the case. The Senate bill said, instead of being the current, and I've forgotten the exact figures, but it was about 17 cents per kilowatt hour, which the House wanted to reduce to less than 6. The Senate bill was reducing that from 17 cents by a penny or two for households and small businesses, by substantially more, perhaps a nickel for community projects, and by about 60% for industrial scale solar programs. And these politicians, the representatives, apparently voted for a bill knowing that they were going to go against it at some point. Sean, we're over. Our time has run out, so we're going to have to say goodbye.
All right. Well, thank you very much for having me on.
Thank you for being here. And thank you for smiling when I was saying you were wrong.
I wonder how gentle rains can fall upon the